abilities allow him to translate design concepts into functional products that optimize lighting in residential projects. He has helped the design community understand the complexity of new and emerging technologies, providing relatable, easy to comprehend explanations. And he's going to do that right now for us. So Jeffrey, thank you so much for being with us. Take it away. The stage is yours.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here with you, and I hope you had a great day. Hope you've learned a whole lot, and it's been a fun experience for you. And I'm hoping that I can finish the day and make you believe that you spent a good amount of time, and it was well worth your time to do it. As Andre said, I'm the principal of Lighting by Jeffrey. I spent 47 years in the lighting industry. I retired and have spent a couple of hours of my retirement helping people understand lighting and understanding lighting in general. So what I've been doing is some educational programs, and that's what we're kind of going to get into today. We're going to talk about lighting, and health. For those of you who are looking for CEUs, this is a CEU presentation with the IDCEC. Apparently, some of you have provided your IDCEC learner numbers when you signed up. If you haven't, don't worry. I'm going to give you my email at the end of the presentation, and I just need you to send me an email, put your IDCEC learner number in that email address, and I will register your attendance at today's event. With that, what are we going to talk about? So we're going to talk first about light and lighting, and then we're going to go into natural light, artificial light, the eye and blue light, and the circadian rhythm. And then we're going to talk about some of the health concerns. So we're going to talk about lighting and cancer, flicker, migraines, sleep, young people issues, lighting as a disinfectant, which I think is a relatively new thing that many you have heard a little bit about. And then we're finally going to try to figure out how we're going to wrap that all, and how are you going to apply that to your work as a designer. So the first thing I want you to make clear is that I am not a doctor. I only play one on TV. The content is basically a compilation of all the things and all the research that I've done over the last 5 or 7 years. A lot of this is public information, so I just want to qualify that you know I'm not a doctor telling you to start smoking because it's good for you. So we'll start first with natural light, because it's important to understand natural light, because the way our body interacts with light is instructed by natural light. So natural light is, first off, not the same all day. It has a lot of changes. It changes in position, it changes in color, it changes in lumen intensity. So if you think about the position of the day, during the middle of the day, over the image on the left, it's coming directly overhead. And then as we go into the evening, and as we start up in the morning, it is coming at us at very severe angles. So it changes through the day. And then that position, in addition, changes through the year. So we all know that the summer solstice is the longest day of the year, and that's because it has a longer path through the sky. So if you follow that image, it's got a very long path. If you conversely go to the winter solstice, which is the pathway on the right, it's the shortest path to the sky, which is why we have that short day in the winter. So that position in the sky is changing constantly through the year. The color of the light is also changing. So we start off the day with a very whitish light, goes to an extremely blue light in the middle of the day. And then as we get ready for bed, we get ready for night, it comes to us in this reddish orange coloration. So if you can see this image right here, we have this path, excuse me, we have this path over on the left from a very, very blue sky to a very reddish orange sky on the right. And then of course it drifts into darkness. The intensity through the day also changes. So at sunrise, we're only at about 40 candles. And to help you understand, the typical office is in that 30 to 50 foot candle rating. But if we go to midday in the direct sun, we can go from 3,200 to 13,000 foot candles of light. And even if we were to go outside at night with a full moon and a nice clear sky, we're getting about a tenth of a foot candle. So we're getting some measurable light even at night. So from the time humans were cavemen, we have lived primarily with natural light until we moved into more of a modern day. So a typical day for us is sunrise, where we're at about 3,000 Kelvin color temperature, heavily angled, and low light levels. In the midday, we go to a massive amount of light that is very, very blue, and it's directly overhead. And then as we go to the evening of the day, we have a reddish orange coloration. It is again coming at us at a very severe angle and very low levels of light. And that is what humans have kind of been engineered to exist with. This is how we have existed. But we have, in fact, had some artificial light. So let's understand the artificial light that has been kind of our the backbone of our existence. Artificial light is basically our ability to convert non-visible energy to visible forms. And we've done that by burning coal, burning gas, burning filaments. We excited gas in a tube. And of course, now we're looking at solid state. But our first artificial light was obviously fire. We burned wood, we burned oil, coals, we had candles at the time. The thing to understand, the thing to remember is that the burning embers, that burning light, is actually a very similar color to the color of light as the sun set, that reddish orange coloration. We then moved to gaslight about the early 1800s. It was an open flame, and this was used for a number of years, but again, understand the color. The color of this light is again very similar to the setting sun, that reddish orange coloration. Incandescent light bulbs were installed first in the 1880s and became popular since. They create light through heat. And what happens is that filament, that wire inside, is heated. And the result of that heat is a glow, and that glow becomes light. But also keep in mind that the coloration of that light source is very reddish orange yellowy. Arc discharge lighting was the next. It was created at the end of the 1930s, but really came to prevalence in the United States during World War II. It was discharged. It's basically a discharge of electricity through this gaseous chamber, and the electrons excite the electrical charge excites the electrons. They start bouncing around inside, and it creates light. But the important thing here is to remember, this is the first time we introduced an artificial light that had a blue content to it. And that essentially changed everything. Solid state lighting, we first started using solid state lighting as a general light source in 2002. This is a current that passes through this diode. It takes that electric current and turns that electric current into light. The thing to understand is virtually all the LED that you see on the market now starts as a blue LED, and through the use of phosphors, influences that color, influences the change so that it becomes the warm colorations that we see. All right, so what am I making such a big deal about blue for? To understand why we're paying so much attention to blue, we have to go inside the eye. So what we're going to do is we're going to understand the eye and help you understand what's going on in the eye so you can understand the importance of blue. So I don't get frightened. We're not going to become ophthalmologists by the end of this session. This is just a little bit of science for you. So I want you to pay attention to where that little arrow is pointing. So we all kind of seen this when we go to the doctor for our annual exam. In the back inside wall of our eye, I'm going to blow that up for you. So that little section looks like this. In the back inside of the wall, and you can see that little indicator there that the light comes into the back inside of our eye. And we have here the rods and cones, which, so I'm using my arrow here so you can understand. We've got rods and cones that are coming across that back wall. And then there's another section called ganglion cells. We're going to talk about those next. So I want you to think about this. How much can you see at night without the lights on? Now, this answer differs. When we first turn the lights on at night, we probably can't see a lot. Momentarily, the entire room is very dark. But if we were to wake up in the middle of the night, it is very likely we can see reasonably well. We can tell that the cat is on the chair or the back end of the chair across the room. We can see that we've got the shirt that we threw over the back of over the dresser, but we can't make out colors very well. Well, that's because of the way the rods in our eyes function. So rods control the scotopic vision. They control a low lumen level. And these are what are in action when we have nighttime vision. But they have a very limited color perception, which is why we can't tell what color the shirt is that we threw on the dresser, but we just know that there's a shirt there. Conversely, the cones control our photopic vision. Photopic is controls high lumen levels. It's our daytime vision sight, and this is how we see good colors. Now, in addition to these, there are ganglion cells, and there is a specific subset of ganglion cells called IPRGC. These are intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. I promise I won't say that again. IPRGC is good. Now, this is only 2% of the total amount of ganglion cells that we have in our eyes. They contain melanopsis, and they transmit information to our brain that tells us what's going on outside. Is it dark? Is it light? Is there blue? Is there not blue? And what that does is that sends information to our pineal gland. So that IPRGC detects a reduction in blue light. So, the blue light is on the color spectrum. And if it sees something above 490 nanometers, it detects that reduction. It sends that signal to the pineal gland. The pineal gland slowly begins to secrete melatonin, and the production and consumption of melatonin drives our circadian cycle. And that pineal gland's right there in the backside of our head. Now, the IPRGC has a peak sensitivity to blue light. Melatonin replenishes during the day, and it is consumed during the night. So when we add that blue light, it starts interfering with the normal functionality of that circadian cycle. So let's talk a little bit about our circadian rhythm. So again, you're probably asking, why is he talking about circadian rhythm? What's the whole point of this? Well, the circadian rhythm is a biological process that's built into our body. It's persistent, but it must be entrained. By entrainment, I mean it needs the assistance of that IPRGC to tell us where that 24-hour cycle is in process. If we didn't have that, if the IPRGC didn't work and we're not sending data points to our brain, this system runs at about a 25, 26-hour cycle. So if we were to be placed into a dark black box, by the end of a month, we might be a half of the day off in our ability to understand what time of the day it is. So this entrainment is very important, because what this circadian cycle does is it controls all of these aspects of our body. So if you just picking out a few, if you notice that we have our best coordination sometime in the early afternoon, we have our highest blood pressure around 6:30 in the evening. And if you notice here somewhere around 9 o'clock, we have our melatonin secretion starts. So our melatonin secretion starts through the night. We have our deepest sleep at 2 in the morning. We have our lowest body temperature, at 4:30 in the morning. And here around 7:30, the melatonin secretion stops and it starts rebuilding during the day and it starts secreting at night. Builds during the day, secretes during the night. So what have we learned at this point? So what our body tells us, and if we understand what the light, what sunlight, what the cycle of the sun and the moon does for us, is that natural light has a cycle. And Mother Nature designed humans to be in sync with that cycle. And when we disrupt that cycle that our bodies were engineered and created around, that is when we start having some issues. And when we introduced fluorescent and to a lesser extent, some of the early solid state lighting, we started adding unnatural color to our world, which then started causing some additional concerns for our body and our functionality. And those concerns are the second half of the presentation, the health concerns that are related to light. Unnatural light at inappropriate times of the day has an adverse effect on our human self. But it's not just humans. You can see this little sea turtle here. He's cute. But many of you are aware that there's an issue with sea turtles. Sea turtles are hatched in worn sand off the water. They pop out of the shell of their egg in the middle of the night. They look for the sunlight, and that sunlight directs them to the water. But if they see artificial light on the shore, rather than going for the water, they will oftentimes head in the direction of land. And unfortunately, they can't exist that way. Migratory birds are equally confused. There are fish that do not see enough day or night coming from the surface of the water, and that confuses them. Plants are equally confused by too much light and can have some adverse growing conditions. So it's not just humans that are being affected by artificial light, it's our entire world. So let's first talk about light and cancer, blue light and melatonin suppression. So remember, so I'm going to repeat a couple of these things because they kind of reinforce why we're having these health issues. So remember that blue rich light during the day, early in the day, is important. That's very healthy for us. Think about the daylight, middle of noontime, we have this really blue light. And blue light at night becomes then a detriment to this circadian cycle because of its interaction with this IPRGC. Melatonin drives the circadian cycle. Melatonin secretes at night, and blue light at night stops or disrupts the secretion of that and disrupts the circadian cycle. Okay. Now, there is this question that continually comes up. It says, well, what is the bad blue? What's this blue that really causes us some issues? And it's blue that falls within this wavelength of 440 to 490 nanometers. So if you look at the scale here of this little image, visible light starts at about 380 and goes up to about 700. This is what the human eye can see. And right here on the left is where ultraviolet would be, and infrared is on the opposite side. So if you were looking at this, we'd have ultraviolet over on the left, then we'd have purple, blues, and then it goes up to yellows and whites, and off at the other side, it's red, and that's when it starts turning into infrared. So this color spectrum between 440 to 490 is the concentration where it has the most impact on our visible spectrum. So there is now new research that is helping us understand more and more and more about this melatonin suppression. Blue light it does suppress the melatonin, but it's not just the color. So we thought that it was only blue light that was causing the concern and the issues with our ability to maintain a good circadian cycle. but there are additional areas that start impacting. So now the amount of light, so brighter light rather than dim light, causes a problem. The spectrum, that color, the specific color that we just talked about. The distribution, how is it coming to us? The timing, if it turns on for 1 second and shuts off, it's going to be less of an impact than if it turns on for 25 minutes and then shuts off. And then the duration, well, that's the duration. The timing is when does it come on? So there are both visual and non-visual areas of the eye that cause that confusion and cause that input that impacts our circadian rhythm. Now, melatonin is kind of a confusing thing as well. It's both a circadian signal, but it is also an anti-cancer hormone. So what it does in order to help fight cancer is it blocks the fatty acids and glucose that are required for cancer production. And when that melatonin is suppressed, that ability to block those fatty acids, it starts disappearing, and that's what starts causing the existence of more and more cancers. Cancer is an additional disease that responds to changes in light. So you've got this agent that's fighting it that responds to light, and you've got this disease that is highly sensitive to light. So stimulation by light's ability to modify it has an ability to modify that circadian system, and that's either good or bad. And when we can find those changes in that. So let's take a look at this little, I think, a really interesting research here. Even dim lights and at night can break these circadian clocks. So let me try to help you understand this a little bit. If we have constant light, what they did is they kind of implanted a cancer cell into a mouse or to a collection of mice. And if we have a constant light, which is the dark blue line here, you can see that there's a much more substantial and quick response to this cancer. If we have complete dark, it's this red line here. So there's a very heavily reduced amount of response. So as you start increasing the amount of light, whatever level you increase, you start getting more and more and more of a response. So the closer that we can get to getting that, getting any of that coloration out of our system, the better off we're going to be, and the better chance we're going to have for fighting cancer in our bodies. It becomes so important that the International Dark Sky Association has actually altered their fixture seal of approval. And they have these new blue standards. They've been in place now for about 4 or 5 years, where they're not certifying or approving any light that is in excess of 3,000 Kelvin color temperature. The question then becomes, can good light help cancer? And this is again, still a lot of this is occurring is still in research, but a standard day-night light-dark lighting reduces the growth of the cancer tumor when you compare it to increased levels of light. So if we can kind of imagine ourselves as cavemen, the closer we can get to that existence, the better chance we're going to have for fighting that. When combined with cancer drugs, that tumor does actually shrink. So we pay attention to our sensitivity to that color and maintain that day-night, light-dark, blue and not blue range, and then combine it with the cancer medication, that tumor shrinks. And then finally, early studies are showing that surges in melatonin at night combined with cancer drugs resulted in a regression that is twice the rate of regular light. So again, these things are all kind of compiling. Now, science is a funny thing. They're not ready yet to make definitive suggestions. They're not ready to state definitively that these are the solutions. But everything, every level of research that has occurred at this point is telling us that we pay attention to the color, we pay attention to the amount of light, and we pay attention to this uh, uh, built-in bodily demand for sun and night, and dark and light, and blue and not blue. And we get closer to fighting cancers in our body. So flicker can have an impact as well. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with flicker, it's a fluctuation of light, basically going on and off. It's a direct result of the frequency of light that we receive. Our light comes to us not in a single line, but it comes to us in waves. It peaks of negative, positive rates. And it comes to us at 60 hertz in the United States and Canada. If we're in Europe and some other places on the planet, it's at 50 hertz. 60 hertz means that it changes, that wave changes 60 times a second. Now, if we have something slower than 50, humans can perceive that light. We can notice that flicker if it's below 50. If it's in that 50 to 70, if it's from 3 to 70, it causes seizure in some highly sensitive people. If it's between 70 and 160, there's some eye strain and some fatigue. When we get to that 100 to 500 hertz range, which is pretty quick, that's when we start getting this stroboscopic effect. So if you've ever noticed a car driving down the street and the wheels don't appear to be traveling at the same speed or same rate as a car, that's the stroboscopic effect. If it's over 2,000 hertz, really is imperceivable by most folks. So what does that mean in a real world? So if we look at an incandescent lamp, and while there are two ways to measure flicker, we'll kind of just concentrate here on this percent flicker. It's a little bit easier to talk about. But an incandescent lamp had a flicker. It had a flicker of about 6.3. But if you remember, when we got rid of a lot of the magnetic ballasts, all of a sudden, this flicker issue disappeared. So if you look at an electronic ballast, we were down to 1.8. So fluorescent light was actually better than incandescent light for a period of time. And when we first created LED, the early LED were at 2.8. Again, almost imperceptible, really was not an issue. But then what happened is people started asking for less expensive LED. And what happened with that is we started playing with some of the circuitry inside, and we have now reintroduced flicker into our conversations. So you can now get flicker with a heavy, you can now get LED with a heavy amount of flicker, and it can cause some problems. So as designers, what are you going to do to help your clients who might be vulnerable to flicker? We'll talk about who those clients are in a second. So first thing you want to do is avoid some of these low-priced LEDs, some of the AC LEDs that are on the market. It is possible to avoid flicker with AC LED, but it is, again, fighting against that cost. So it might not be cost effective to do that. We might want to avoid LED replacement light bulbs and instead switch to integrated LED solutions, because there is a very small amount of real estate in which to put some of the circuitry required to get rid of that LED. And of course, make sure that you're selecting dimmable products and you're putting a dimmer in a room when it is absolutely necessary. Because if you don't need it, it's just exacerbating the possibility that you might have trouble with flicker in the future. So who are your clients? So probably the number one on this list are those folks who have a photosensitive epilepsy. Now, this is not everyone who suffers from epilepsy. This is only a 20% subset. So they have to specifically have a photosensitive epilepsy. Frankly, I think I've known more people that have migraines than photosensitive epilepsy. Migraines affect 10% of the population, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But they are also going to be impacted by that. Folks with photophobia and kind of a heightened sensitivity to light, young people with autism or Asperger's, and then to a lesser impact, those who suffer from Meniere's disease, HIV/AIDS with renal damage. Again, not everybody with HIV/AIDS. It has to be HIV/AIDS with renal damage. And if you've ever seen Better Call Saul, his brother suffered from an extreme case of electromagnetic hypersensitivity. That is just a sensitivity to the electronics behind lighting and electric. So those are the cases. These are your clients. You want to be very, very concerned and careful when placing light that might cause flicker into the design. So I told you that I would talk to you a little bit about migraines because this is some interesting new research that has come up. This is the second most common type of headache. It affects about 10% of the world population. Women are 3 times more likely than men to have an issue with migraines. It is in business the single most common cause for absenteeism. And light is unfortunately the trigger for that. So what happens with migraines or with light generates this electrical signal in the eye, and it causes a reaction in the brain. Migraines, cluster headaches, brain traumas, they're all extremely sensitive, even with small amounts of light. And blue light delivers the strongest pain response. So what am I going to do? What can I do to ameliorate any of these migraine issues? So I think the first thing that you'd want to do is stay with a warmer light. Think about those products that are on the market that are about 2,700 Kelvin. You want to avoid excessive bright light. You want to avoid glare. And this is kind of an odd one, but you want to avoid bright, checkered, striped, and zigzag patterns. So those can be as reactive or can be as much of a reaction as the light. And then, of course, we also need to be mindful of the flicker that we just talked about. Now, there is a new light on the market. I normally don't mention specific products in this, but I wanted to call this to attention because I know that there are a number of people who are caused by this. The Harvard Medical School neuroscience group spent 10 years trying to understand migraines. And they have determined that the best way to solve a migraine is for this green light. Now, it's just not any green light. So you can't just go and buy a green light bulb or paint a light bulb green and put it in your lamp. It is a very specific spectral definition. So it's between 10 nanometers. I already told you our visible light spectrum is between 380 and 700. So it's this narrow band of green that is only 10 nanometers wide. And that very specific color is said to deliver a lot of relief. So if you do suffer from this, just jot down LA lamp. Again, it's not a for-profit situation, so I feel comfortable telling you this. All the profits go to Harvard University, and that's rolled back into their neuroscience studies. But if you have that issue, you might want to investigate this LA lamp. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sleep. So if I'm with a live audience, I'll say, hey, who has trouble sleeping? And I almost always get about 20%, 25% of the audience raises their hand. Yeah, I've got trouble sleeping. Well, the simplest, cleanest, easiest answer, the easiest solution is for you to remember why and how our bodies were engineered when they were first created many billions of years ago. They were created with this 24-hour light-dark cycle used by cavemen and farmers. Daylight is this nice blue color. Evening is very reddish orange. That's what our bodies demand. And when we keep that light-dark cycle, it keeps our circadian rhythm in balance. As soon as you mess with that, you start messing with your sleep. An interesting fact is if you're a worker in an office, If you have a window in your office, you sleep 46 minutes a night better than workers who don't have that. So it's all connected. Good sleep practices. Remember, the things that start impacting our circadian are the amount of light coming to us at night, the spectrum, the color, the distribution, where is it coming from? The timing, when does that light turn on, when does it turn off, and the duration, how long is that light on? So pre-sleep, right, we've now kind of penciled it down to the iPad being among the most difficult for us at night. They used to tell us don't use any active, don't watch television, don't use your phone. But what they're finding now, because the phone is so close to us but doesn't have a lot of light coming out, it's not as much of an issue. Televisions across the room are providing us with a lot of light, but it's pretty far away. But an iPad, we have a tendency to take that iPad and use it pretty close up to our face. So that can cause trouble. Get rid of this clock with blue numbers on it. This is going to be the biggest problem you've got. And of course, if you're living in an area where street lighting comes into the window, that blue street light can be really a problem. And you should do everything you can to block that from view. This is one of the most interesting studies that I read about. It was a sleep study. It was conducted at the Sisters of St. Francis Health Center in Canada. And it's a study done with retired nuns. If you're a researcher, you probably know that nuns are actually considered a really good research group because they oftentimes don't have a lot of the toxins that many of us, there's not a lot of smokers, there's not a lot of alcoholic nuns. So they have this very clean system and they get some really solid results. They went to this health center. They had some healthy elderly nuns. There were some who suffered from dementia. And of course, as I said, not a lot of stimulants use. What their goal was to try to figure out how they could increase the exposure to daylight, limit some of this blue wavelength, and then make sure that the nurses had good work areas. So they re-outfitted 32 patient rooms. They modified them to daylight spectrum light. So in the middle of the room, you have that daylight spectrum light, and the hallways contained a single light switch that had a left or right switch on the wall. When you had it switched to the left, it was a regular fluorescent light source. And when you switched it to the right, it was a red sleeve fluorescent. So of course, you already know that we want that red light at night. So at night, they switched it over to red. During the day, they switched it over to regular, gave those nuns a solid blast of blue during the day. And at night, nothing but red light. The results were quite amazing. The resident nuns slept throughout the entire night. They were awake longer during the day. They had lower blood pressure, lower insomnia. Other different medical conditions were improved upon. They had more social participation. And this is the thing that's really interesting. Even those who were suffering from Alzheimer's had a more cognitive or lucid daytime interaction. So really and the only thing they did is switch the lights on this. So really amazing results. Some equally interesting things are occurring with young people and research on young people. They're noticing that a blast of blue light during the morning actually elevates the cortisol awakening response. And when they do that, they're better prepared for the day. So what the experiment was is they took a group of teens and they deprived them of sleep. And the first group, they shot with this blast of blue light in the morning. And the other group, they just sent to school. And what they found is that the teens that had the blue light were much better off and they participated better in their school studies than those who were not given this blue light in the morning. So a lot of interesting studies. And then, of course, very interesting information on ADHD, those who are on the autism spectrum and those with sensory processing disorder. ADHD is about 5% of the population. 1 in 68 suffer from autism. Essentially, we have to understand that what this is really a difficulty processing and interpreting our sensory responses. And light and vision is one of those sensory responses. So they can be extremely sensitive to light. So remember, we've got sound, color, smell, texture. All of those things can be distracting for these young people. So we have to remember that light is just one of those. And what that does is it sends a message to their brain and it starts triggering some negative behavior and can trigger negative behavior. It doesn't always, but it has the possibility of doing that. So what do we want to do for these young people? The first thing we want to do with the solutions that we want to come up with is a small amount of reflective light. We also have to pay attention to shadows. Shadows are light and they're a distraction. We want soft upward lighting. So think about a torchère lamp as opposed to recessed cans. Lighting that is indirect is better. We want to remove glare from that space so that indirect light can do that. We talked about the flicker issue. We want to get rid of that. We want to get rid of any light source that is going to cause that flicker. We want to also reduce the contrast between the windows and the walls. So if we think about a window right next to a black wall, we're going to have this bright white and very dense dark surface right next to each other, and that is going to trigger some of that adverse response. And I know this is going to be difficult for a lot of interior designers, but we want to reduce the detailing and the distracting elements in the design. We might say, oh, we want to have we might want to paint the trim a different color in a room. We might want to have large pieces of artwork that are going to be completely different than the background color. Those are the kinds of things that we as designers might be inclined to do, but they are going to have a negative effect on the young people that are going to be living in that space. So we have to kind of back off on our aesthetic sensibilities a touch and get more attuned to our more technical sensibilities. Neonatal lighting is another thing that's really kind of interesting there. You see that this is a study that was done also in Canada at the Surrey Memorial Hospital. Most neonatal units are lit with a very, very blue light throughout the whole night. And what this hospital decided to do was adjust that neonatal lighting so it was more in tune with the natural light during the day. So very blue during the day, reddish during the night. And what this did is it started promoting the introduction of the circadian rhythm quicker. And when those children finally did go home, there was a much better transition for them to get into a normal flow of light. And they were much more successful in their recuperation. I did not know this when I first did this research, but the solution for neonatal jaundice is to bathe these babies in blue light, almost exactly this color. However, what happens is newborn eyes are highly sensitive to light waves that are below 450 nanometers. So they have a 90% transmission rate, where an 80-year-old person will transmit less than 20% of that. So what was happening is they were solving the neonatal jaundice, but they were permanently damaging the infant's eyes with this solution. So if you notice this little guy right here, he's got a huge eye protection on over his face to avoid any kind of issue with that while they solve this neonatal jaundice issue. Pretty recent, you've probably been hearing about light as a disinfectant. We're all kind of living in this post-pandemic world, and we're thinking there's got to be some sort of solution. And there are many people that believe that light can do that. We are at the end of the antibiotic period. Antibiotic resistant strains and diseases are growing. There needs to be some sort of a preemptive approach to solving this problem. We need to start disinfecting our work areas a lot better. And so the solution can, in fact, be lighting. So the great thing about LED is that it allows us to customize this light spectrum. So, I don't want to keep harping on this, but this is our 380 to 700 nanometer spectrum. And what we can do, what LED engineers can do, is they can fine tune the delivery of light to very minute sections of the color spectrum that we exist in. And what they are finding is that by fine tuning this, they can find areas in this visible light spectrum that have germicidal effects that can, in fact, have antibacterial impact on some of the things that we don't want in our body. So what these germicidal ultraviolets, and they're abbreviated as GUV, so you might see some of that advertisements. That you can combine this disinfectant spectrum, this spectrum that we know does a lot of good, with a luminaire, and it essentially starts bathing the entire room in that amount of light. And it can be turned on and off at different times. So you may have luminaires that during normal hours are going to just simply provide the room with light. As soon as you leave that room at night, it turns on this germicidal ultraviolet light that disinfects the space and is ready for occupation then the next day. So there are concerns, and one of the reasons why this is still being researched is that we still have to understand a couple of things. Obviously, this addition to violet light in our room is going to impact the color of the space. So we may find that simply undesirable. It might just be too much purple in the room. So the items that we have in our office or in our living area are going to be impacted by this color. Are we going to be able to turn this on and off during the day? Do we want to leave it on during the day? How many do we need during the day? A lot of this is still under research. There's also some talk right now about a germicidal UV that is not in the visible spectrum. So the one we were talking about before was within our visible spectrum between the 380 and 700 nanometers. But if you go outside of that, we go into this ultraviolet area. This is non-visible to humans, could be visible to animals, and some and plants are impacted by it. And what they're finding, that this 254 nanometers right here, this little dotted line in this UVC range, is really, really good for getting rid of some of these bacteria. But there is an impasse in the science community as to how much harm that is causing the humans. So do we introduce them into the room? Do they continue to cause harm? There are not yet standards and measurements that are being set up. So because they're not set up yet, we have to be very careful with using this as a solution. So my advice is, I would sit back for another year on these type of products. But if you're so inclined, just be very, very careful with how you're using it and who's going to occupy that space. Okay, so how are we going to apply all of this to our work? There's a lot of information here. I understand that. But keep in mind that this is a great little sketch. Here we have light, and that light has an impact on that IPRGC. And that impacts our circadian rhythm, and that has some impacts our neuroendocrine, and that results in issues with cortisol, melatonin. That melatonin has caused a serious cancer increase. It disrupts the circadian rhythm. Our immune function disappears. We have some metabolic issues. And then, of course, on the cortisol side, we have some neurobehavioral changes and different moods. So just keep in mind that everything is coming from that light. Everything is then fed in through our body through these IPRGC. So remember, the human eye has non-photoreceptors that help regulate the circadian rhythm and the production of neurochemicals that impact our sleep, our mood, and our health. Vision-based elements in the eyes assist in assorting psychological aspects of the body. The normal population benefits from high levels of blue during the day and the early afternoon, lower levels to warm colors at night, and after 10, we should be in darkness. Brightly illuminated colors in the office, they mean efficiency. They deliver to us the impression of productivity. Dim red lights in the evening start associating our body with calm, with relaxation. And we have to pay more attention to that red light. So what do we do in our offices? Our offices, try to keep them in that 3,500K range. We could go up to 6,500K, but you have to be careful if you have a staff of people that stay very, very late into the night, because that could have an impact. At home, we should kind of concentrate in this 2,700 to 3,000 range. Could be lower if you like. The sweet spot in a home is at 2,700 to 3,000, because we need to prepare ourselves for an evening, for the evening hours. And those of you who are concerned with, if you're working in commercial designs, you need to be concerned with shift workers, long-term patients in hospitals. You need to worry about seniors. And in the residential area, you need to be concerned about seniors, people with low vision, children with learning disorders, newborns, the medically infirm, and children and adults with specific maladies like those we discussed. In a perfect world, this is kind of what we should be doing. We should be coming in the morning with a very white light, moving up to a very blue light. By the middle of the day, we should be here at somewhere in this high blue 6,500, coming at about 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, cutting that down, moving into a closer white light somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 or 7 o'clock. We should have warmer temperatures, warmer color temperatures, about 2,700, nothing more than that in the late evening. And at night, we should not go over 2,400, 2,200 Kelvin, and preferably dark or red. The key here, the understanding is realize what the circadian rhythm does to our body, understand what nature has built into our systems, and put that into your design work now. So we talked about natural light, we talked about artificial light, we talked about the eye and blue light, circadian rhythm, light and cancer, flicker. Then we discussed migraines, sleep, young people's issues, lighting as a disinfectant, and applying all of that. We'll get to questions now, but I want to just jump ahead from this slide to put my email address in. So I am Jeffrey Dross. I write a blog about lighting, and if you'd like to, you can sign up to see that at lightingbyjeffrey.com. You'll get an email to let you know. For those of you who need the IDCEC certification for this, please send me an email with your IDCEC learner number. It's at bowtie.jeffrey, that's Jeffrey spelled the correct way, Jeffrey, at gmail.com, and I will log you in, put that into your account at the on their site. So if we have some questions, I'm going to leave this slide up. So for those of you who are still searching for a pencil or trying to log that into your iPhone, I'll leave it up for you. So if we have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Jeff, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm so fascinated by how we think we just turn a light on if we need light, turn it off, but yet we're learning how the connection between light and our health is just, who knows, we're just starting, right? And we just keep learning more about connection.
Andrea, it's interesting because we didn't even understand we had a circadian rhythm that was connected to light until the year 2000. So this
crazy.
is 22 years old. So the reason why it seems like we're hearing all of this right now is simply because this is new science. This is really new stuff.
That's so interesting. But like you said, you're not a doctor, but the
I'm not a doctor.
not a doctor, but the early research is very strong. So obviously, people can go to your blog to learn more about the research as it comes, and it's just a fascinating category. So thank you so much for the
Sure.
presentation. I was curious about what if I mean, we all know some night owls, right? People who just thrive being at night. Are they affected? Because it seems like they're on their own circadian rhythm. I mean, are they still affected by this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, ultimately, what it does is it catches up to most folks. As we're young, we have a lot of defenses that allow us to fight off all of the negative impacts. So, most night owls are a little bit younger, and they're able to go out to a club and dance until 3 in the morning, and then sleep for an hour, and then head for the office. At least I used to be able to do that, but I don't think I could do that now. So I think that we are affected by it. We just have better defenses as we're younger. Those defenses start getting toppled as we get older.
Okay, we do have some questions from the audience. How can we determine existing lighting flicker rates?
So there are things called flicker detectors. You can get some of those at hardware stores. There are a couple of apps that are available for your phone that will try to determine that. I have not found a good one. There are a couple people that say that there are good ones. I've tried a few and have not really been very successful with it. But you could certainly try the different apps, find the one that has the highest rating, and put that onto your phone, and it will try to interpret that. One of the easiest, simplest ways to detect flicker is to grab a chopstick or a pen and simply wave it in the air. Now, as you're watching this wave, if you see a continuous image of the chopstick or the pencil, or in my case, this fountain pen, you don't have any flicker, because you're seeing that exact image all the way around. If it looks like it's going ping, 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 dotting its way up, that is going to indicate to you that there is a flicker in the space.
Okay, cool. And the questions are coming in now, so we'll answer a few.
Okay.
So what is the best type of light bulb hue for the evening?
For the evening. So I always tell people the best thing for you to do with lighting is use lighting between 2,700 and 3,000. And I like to have that light source linked to the aesthetic base of the room. So if you have a cool room that's got lots of blues and purples and black and white, slate, stainless steel, black and white, you want to use 3,000 Kelvin. If you have a room that is somewhat warmer, use that 2,700 Kelvin. Those are really going to be a good place for you to start. Don't do anything higher than that 3,000. That 3,000 is going to look plastic in a residential environment. We might have offices that are 3,500, 4,200, but I would not do that in a residence. I would rather see you stick with that 3,000 as your max in a residential environment.
Okay. And here's an interesting question I never thought of before. Do people with blue or green eyes see color differently than someone with brown eyes?
It's a great question. I guess if we all knew how we saw each other's color.
That's true.
It's I think I don't know that I've heard that. I don't know that I've heard any science on it. I do know that there is a heightened sensitivity to the amount of light with blue eyes. So people with blue eyes or lighter color eyes are going to be more likely to need sunglasses than people with darker eyes, because there appears to be some. So there must be some relationship to it, but I don't know that I've spent any time researching whether or not the color has an impact on the color that we see. but it certainly does impact the quantity of light that enters our eyeball.
Right. Okay. And here's a question about aging eyes.
Yes.
Very big topic. What recommendations do you have about lighting for older people with altered vision? That's a great
So so what really has to happen, I would not change the color. As humans, we perceive bluer light to be brighter. So if you had a blue light and a yellow light right next to each other, and they were both putting out the same quantity of light, the same measurable quantity of light, we as humans would believe that the blue one is brighter. That's just a kind of an inherent prejudice that's built into our bodies. So don't change the color of light because that is just, that's just kind of, we have this perception that it's better. We need to increase the quantity of light. So there needs to be simply more light in that space. There's actually 5 things that are going on with our eyes that are causing our eyes to see less light as we age. And it's a combination of the lens yellowing, it's a combination of the muscular area around our eyes that allow for the contraction and the movement of the eye to basically, like everything else, they get old and they don't work quite as well. Our pupils start shrinking, and we all know that the pupil is where the light enters. So that pupil dilates a little bit, that means less light's coming into our eyes. Our lens becomes less clear as well. So there's a number of these things that are occurring to us. We simply have to add light. The Illuminating Engineering Society suggests you add 1/3 more light for a senior. The Society for the Prevention of Blindness actually wants 3 times as much. So they're definitely bullish on the amount of light. The other thing that you probably should be considering doing is adding more directional light. So as a senior ages, maybe you don't want to have that entire room lit with 7,000 lumens of light, but putting a light next to the workspace where that senior is working, that's going to add light exactly where it needs to be. So you might need to bring in more portable lamps for a senior as well.
Those are great tips. Thank you so much. One more question.
Sure.
So, is there research relating to circadian rhythms / lighting on people's productivity? This woman is most productive at 3 p.m. while her husband is in the morning. What do you say to that?
I suspect that there's probably some truth to that. If you look at that circadian cycle, they will tell you that most people are more productive in the late afternoon to like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and we have a slow an ability the slow ramp up, and then we start fading after about 2 or 3 o'clock. That's with perfect light. So there's a good likelihood that you've got some personal areas come into your productivity, and probably the impact of circadian light coming to us, or the amount of light coming to us. So it could be either one of those things. But yeah, you've got that kind of similar productivity area.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey. If you have more questions for him, you have his information. You can reach out to him.
Yeah, please do.
I'm always learning new things from you. So it was a great presentation on lighting, and I'm going to take a look at my lighting going forward. Definitely.
Everybody should.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great evening.
So we're almost done. We're near the end, but we still have